Hi, welcome to the bathtub. It's the old masturbator, this is Scott Bradfield, in the Dodo-free bathtub. Dodo's in the other room having a good time. I just checked on her. She's quite happy. And Lucky's here next to the sun, so she's sort of okay. I'll trust this dog. And we're going to talk a little bit, sort of a classical gas episode. Don't forget, 5,000 subscribers, 5,000 people have so little to do in their lives, are so at odds with anything interesting to do in their lives that they've actually subscribed to this completely useless show. And we're going to have 5,000 exactly or a little bit more. And very soon, in the next couple of weeks, I'll set up a date. We'll have a cocktail party, a virtual cocktail party. Everyone can bring their virtual cocktails, and we won't just be drinking this stupid water anymore. We'll set it up a live chat session. It's coming for 5,000 subscribers. Today is classical gas without the wonderful Mason Williams music because we don't want to get sued. And we're talking about Robert Louis Stevenson. Robert Louis Stevenson is a writer who I never quite had any interest in most of my life. And it's partly because of all the movies I watched as a kid. Treasure Island, for example, was always on TV when I was a kid. It was like Disney version of it. And it was like, I think Charles Laughton did a version of it. And it was always seemed to be different Treasure Islands. I think they remade it even when my son and I may have watched one. Anyway, I always found Treasure Island, the movies and TV shows, kind of boring. And I didn't quite get them. I had read I remember my mother reading when I was a kid, The Child's Garden of Verse, which she loved as a little kid. And I remember her reading it to me. It was okay. And I didn't have any really strong, I liked Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but it's been redone so much in TV and movies that as another thing that I kind of liked the movies, but just wasn't that interested in them in some ways. And so I was kind of glad to try reading him again in order to review a book called The Wilder Shore, The Romantic Odyssey of Fanny and Robert Louis Stevenson by a woman named Camille Peri. I'd never heard of her before. I've turned in the piece. It'll probably be out in a couple of weeks. I'm doing this a little prematurely, because I always forget all these books so quickly. Anyway, I love this biography. I'll probably try to remember to post a link when it comes out below, but it won't be up for a couple of weeks. It's a wonderful biography about two real characters. I mean, you know Robert Louis Stevenson was sick all his life, but he met this woman from America who was a kind of Annie Oakley character. She went many thought she was a beautiful woman as well, but she had a gun in her purse, and she traveled all over the world with her kids and had a horrible husband who she was constantly leaving. And they met when she was still married at an artist colony, and he fell in love with her. Stevenson fell in love with her, followed her to America, traveled all over California, Carmel. He spent a lot of time in the woods around Carmel, which is where many say he imagined some of the Treasure Island locations. And they had this, I won't go too much further into it, but they had this incredibly adventurous life. They traveled all over, and this guy was in terrible health the entire time. He died at 50. She lasted another 20 years. Terrific story. Fascinating couple of people. Quite radical people. In many ways. They were totally anti-religion. They hated the middle class of England and the corruption. You'll see that in this book here. So I want to go a little bit into this. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I reread this. I read it a couple times over the years for classes, and I liked it. But this time I read it, I just loved it. It is not just a monster story. In fact, it is really a total satire on the hypocrisy of the Victorian middle classes, particularly the men, who would walk around in these kind of gentlemanly manners and behave like they were upstanding citizens. And they were going off to Whitechapel to have sex with every poor prostitute they could find. They were taking drugs and running all that. And a lot of these people were on drugs anyway because that was their medical treatments, like Stevenson and his wife, Fanny. They were always taking laudanum and opium and so forth. Anyway, the joke of this, really, the book is that Dr. Jekyll is an upstanding guy in town, but then he decides to take a medicine which will bring out his evil side. He's the good side, and then there's his evil side. But the joke of the whole book is obviously that all men, particularly in this culture that Stevenson's writing about, they're all evil anyway. There's a certain. I'll read a little passage. This is when the story is at first told by a neighbor who sees somebody disappear into Dr. Jekyll's home, and this Mr. Hyde goes out and he just stomps on some small, I think it's a child at the beginning of the book who I think dies, because he's just so thoughtless. He just stomps across this little poor kid lying in the street. And people start to not like him very much. But he lives in a house. One of the things important is Dr. Hyde doesn't. He's kind of hairy and everything, but he's very much a gentleman. And he lives in these 2 rooms that are really well decorated. They have nice paintings on the walls and really nice carpets. And he's a really middle-class Victorian gentleman who goes off and does horrible things at night. This is a little passage when Dr. Jekyll is recalling how he got into this kind of dual personality, this medicine that he takes. He says, he talks about his fall into this other character. The fall seemed natural, like a return to the old days before I had made my discovery. It was a fine, clear January day, wet underfoot, where the frost had melted, but cloudless overhead, and the Regent's Park was full of winter chirrupings and sweet with spring odors. I sat in the sun on a bench, the animal within me licking the chops of memory. The spiritual side, a little drowsed. There's a spiritual side, and then he's brought out this evil side. The spiritual side, a little drowsed, promising subsequent penitence, but not yet moved to begin. So the spiritual wants to make up for these bad things, but not right away, not in a hurry. After all, I reflected, I was like my neighbors. And then I smiled, comparing myself with other men, comparing my active goodwill with the lazy cruelty of their neglect. So he's thinking, I'm as good as they are. They're just as evil as me. And at the very moment of that vainglorious thought, a qualm came over me, a horrid nausea, and the most deadly shuddering. These passed away and left me faint, and then, as in its turn, the faintness subsided. I began to be aware of a change in the temper of my thoughts, a greater boldness, a contempt of danger, a solution of the bonds of obligation. I looked down. My clothes hung formlessly. He's transformed without taking the medicine. He's transformed into Mr. Hyde. I looked down and my clothes hung formlessly on my shrunken limbs. The hand that lay on my knee was corded and hairy. I was once more Edward Hyde. A moment before, I had been safe of all men's respect, wealthy, beloved. The cloth laying for me in the dining room at home. At home, there's nice cloth and nice clean house. And now I was a common quarry of mankind, hunted, houseless, a known murderer, thrall to the gallows. So this comes up a lot in there's 2 other novellas in here, both of them excellent. One's called The Ebb Tide, which is about 3 basically losers who managed to get a job running a boat full of champagne. And I think they're taking maybe to America. I forget where they're going with it. They have this boatload of champagne they're going to take, and they're total losers. They're total creeps, junk, and they basically get drunk the whole time. They start drinking up all the champagne, and they end up on this island where there's a white person who's been running these, basically taking over, enslaving all the local people and doing everything he can to make money off them. And they decide they want to kill him. The notion that all these people, all human beings, all men and women even, have some evil in them is a recurring thought in Stevenson. And another story in here called the Beach at Feliza, which is about another kind of white English person going to these islands, the Polynesian islands, and he sees a woman who's very beautiful, and there's a local trader. There's a lot of these Joseph Conrad-like characters. He's a local trader who's, again, he's just exploiting all the local people, making as much money off them as he can. And this local trader says, well, if you want to have sex with her, she's yours. Just tell her you married her. We'll have a fake marriage. So they have a fake marriage so they can fool this woman and then have sex with her and then just leave her behind. But the central character actually falls in love with this woman and actually decides to stay with her. So there is this feeling that Stevenson, and even in his relationship with Fanny and the places they traveled, that they actually became quite involved with all the people they met, all these different islanders and people like that. And these two other novellas are really about kind of seeing through this exploitation of trading, the use of trade and the British military to actually control these people who don't deserve to be controlled. Anyway, they're pretty complicated stories. They're a lot of fun. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is still great. It's still a great story. But I was so interested by the lives of them and by the rereading these stories that I went back and read Treasure Island. I've never read Treasure Island. It is really fun. First of all, it's totally different from the movies. The movies try to make Long John Silver into the central character. I think he shows up at the beginning of all the movies I've always seen. He comes and stays at this kid's inn or something like that. I haven't seen him in a long time, but Long John Silver is really kind of all over the book, all over the movies. But in the book, he's actually a sort of far distant character. He doesn't show up until about a third of the way through the book. He's often not seen. He's often off in the woods trying to. There's a big issue in Treasure Island where Long John Silver is on the boat. He organizes a mutiny and he tries to take over the boat. I won't tell you more than that. But it's very different from the movies. I don't remember any of this stuff in this book from the movies. I really enjoyed it. I can't put it down. I couldn't put it down, actually. It's been a long time since I read anything that I just found really just so enjoyable. And he really is narratively really a smart writer. So anyway, that was a book he wrote. He supposedly wrote it one chapter a day when he was in bed, because they don't know if he had some lung disease. Some say tuberculosis, others say it was something else. But he was coughing blood all the time. But he sat in bed, and his wife and Fanny would take care of him. She was a writer as well, and a journalist, and a quite committed political thinker and activist in her way. So as well as her daughter. I guess her daughters and granddaughter were as well. Anyway, terrific, fascinating writer. I'm actually going to probably read. I'll probably read the other book I never wanted to read, was Kidnapped. Again, I just had no interest in these as a kid. This is a wonderful story. A wonderful story. It's a good young adult book, but it's an adult book as well. You just can't put it down. All right, that's Classical Gas. It's a hell yeah. It's a double hell yeah. Go get some Robert Louis Stevenson. He's much better than I ever thought he was going to be. Stay safe.